So I am in Hampstead again. Haven't been here for a while actually because my sister, ever since my sister's got custody of Leo, I've always visited Hawley instead of coming straight here. And yeah, it's interesting. She's kind of got the child, but they haven't actually been signed. It hasn't been signed off yet. So it's very annoying um, how my mum and my sister are allowed to be alone around Alicia because they had this long 6 week test a year ago, and they were able to sort of not gain custody fully, but they can spend like 3 to 4 hours, 5 hours alone with Alicia. But because the other child was registered with a different district, and they failed the test 2 years ago that allowed them to have custody, because of that, they still are on a sort of restriction of that child. So because of that, they, for the last six months, they're allowed to be alone with the younger child, but not with the 2 year old child, which is, they're allowed to be alone with a 1 year old child, but not with a 2 year old child. And it adds a lot of complication because if Marco wants to do something, he can't leave the child alone. So it's very difficult for him. And the person who was there was one person that was particularly bitchy towards them, like interrogating them, just trying to dig up as much information on Marco as they possibly could to try and prevent him from coming. He wasn't allowed to see the child for a year and a half, and when he did see this child, they've always been very, very bitchy and nasty, and almost like, yeah, this child is definitely going to go into adoption, even though she was pregnant with a second child. And I think that was the only reason why Leo didn't go into adoption, was because Sophie was pregnant again, and this time she might not lose custody, and she didn't lose custody. Marco managed to gain custody. Sophie lost custody, but Marco didn't. And yeah, it's annoying how the woman who was most insistent on this child, on Leo going into adoption, was in that county. But 3 weeks ago, a week ago actually, she moved into the same county that they're now in. And she's working in social services still, but in a different county. And they haven't had an unexpected check in like 5 months, and within a few days of this woman moving county and being in their county, they suddenly get an unexpected call. And it was fine, they're not, she wasn't alone with the children, but it's just a really strange situation where you're allowed to be alone with the younger child but not with the other child. Why? Because the other child hasn't been signed off. It's still registered with the child services and is living under Marco's care. But if Marco was to ever be found not with this child, they could technically just take the child away. And even though there was a court case a couple of weeks ago which was supposed to sign him off, and so that they don't have to keep doing the checks, he didn't do it. The DBS check wasn't done, so basically the court couldn't sign him off because they said, well, we haven't done a criminal check on you. And he was kind of angry why they didn't do a criminal check before. It was almost like they were deliberately trying to sabotage and delay the process of actually giving over custody. It's almost like they want to take the child off these people, my sister and her partner. So they want to take probably both children off if they can. They can't do the first one because that was never signed over. She was never signed over to the foster care system, whereas the first child was signed over. But because the child was signed over to the foster care system, if anything was to happen, they might be blamed for anything. Hence, because of that, they're using this as just an excuse to take the taxpayers' money off them as much as possible. They're still doing weekly visits. They're still doing, they didn't do any unannounced checks. They were going to, but yeah, they haven't done for 5 months, and they did an unexpected check just days after this woman who was threatening to put the child in adoption. It's almost, I think the judge said that this woman has been unfairly judging this couple. I know Sophie went through a really bad mental illness phase 2 years ago, but she has sort of recovered, and she's a far more stable than she was. And I think this woman doesn't believe that you can change. She thinks if you're extremely mentally ill, that's it. You're extremely mentally ill for the rest of your life. You're never going to recover. And I don't know what's wrong with her. It feels like there's a mental illness in her that just makes her think that this child was meant for foster care, or no, adoption. This child was meant for adoption, and so she was doing all she could to prevent this good father, Sophie's new partner, from having any access or custody to this child. And during the interrogation, you know, I think the judge even noticed that this seemed more like an interrogation, and you're asking him questions that he can't possibly expect to answer. And you know, if a father thinks that someone is safe for a couple of hours, surely that should be enough. But because this child was in foster care, that's not enough. And not even I can be alone with Leo, because I haven't had the 6-week check. The social services weren't able to make money out of me to get this 6 weeks check, where they come to my house every single day to ask lots of questions, 4 hours worth of questions and then 4 hours worth of testing. I don't know, it's just a big money making scam, and it just annoys me how there's no 6-week test needed for the younger child. Why? Because I think my sister had a 6-week test. My mum didn't need to have it because the child was never signed on to foster care. The child stayed with the father. I think the father was able to keep custody of the child, providing he said that I would take full responsibility for him. So because of that, I can be alone with him, because technically that child is under the father's care. But because this foster care child, the one that was taken by foster care and is slowly being given back, because he hasn't actually been signed over. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I think as soon as a father is deemed to prove that he can do it. And thing is, if Marco hadn't have had this child, this second child, there would have been no proof that he can look after Leo, and the social services would have seen that as evidence that he can't do it, and therefore that child would never have come out of foster care if it weren't for Alicia, the new child that was born. And it's just I hate this whole system. It's completely abusive how you are deemed a bad parent unless you can prove that you are a good parent now, even if you've had 3 kids before, and even if those 3 kids are fine and say that the father's fine and are happy with have no complaints about the father. Even if all that is in place, if that father does not have an immediate child in his care, then they will use that as an excuse that they can't do it. And with me, that's what they did. I don't have an immediate child in my care, and I've never been a parent, and they basically use that as an excuse as to why I can't do it. So it's just a disgusting system that just abuses kids, and they use it on the base. You can't prove you can do it, and we're not going to allow you to do it unless, of course, you do a big long program where we monitor you and just basically use you as a cash cow whilst taking money off the government, while saying that this child is in need. And it's just child abuse. I think it's child trafficking, not to do abusing the child, but rather treating the child like a king, whilst they just try and use the system to try and make as much money out of it. And it's just annoying how, if the social services did do an unexpected check and found that my mum and sister were with Leo, they could take the child away. And that's even though it's been declared that they can look after the other child, the younger one. If they're caught alone with the older one, it just doesn't make any sense. The older one's older. I know Sophie can't look after babies, but that's in the first year. When I say a baby, I mean like less than 1. When you're a baby, they can cough on their own phlegm, they can they can choke on their own food or whatever, and looking after a baby is very, very hard. Looking after a 1-year-old is also very hard, because they constantly put things in their mouth, and I know Alicia was doing that a lot, like even taking things out of the bin and putting it. You have to watch them like 24/7. So I can understand 1 and 2. But Leo's 2.5 now. He's not able to look after himself, but he's at a stage where he can judge things a lot better, and therefore it's really.
That's Sophie.
Okay, go away.
Right, I'm gonna put that on dry that out somewhere.
Go away.
I'm gonna dry this out.
I have to get my mum out of here, because she's going to start saying, "Oh, why are you talking about Sophie online?" But yeah, so it's just really annoying how the social services can do that. I do generally think it's an abuse. I actually would love to have a gang of people kidnap that woman, Claire, her name is, kidnap Claire, take her into some sort of thing, look like you're about to severely beat her up, I can go in there, maybe have a few kits. It'll be light, but I just basically want to scare the shit out of her, and then I want to let her go. And I was saying so to Sophie that I really want that to happen, because I'm really angry that I wasn't allowed to look after this child, and instead this child was just used as some sort of cash cow by someone else. So I'd love to. If someone gave me an option, gave me saying, hey, we've got a bunch of lackeys, big strong men that want to and we could like choose someone to beat up, I would choose her. Just most not to actually hurt, but just to scare the shit out of them. And I really, that's how I feel, because I feel like she uses the system to take kids off people and unfairly judge them. You know, I know Sophie couldn't do it, but Marco can. And even now, you know, it's not as simple as, okay, you've been alone with Alicia. Yeah, I don't know how many times my sister and my mum have been alone with Alicia, taking care of them. It's been over a year, and then to think that they don't have custody or rights to do that to a child that's 1 year older. It doesn't make any sense. You know, if the social services really are on board, they would see that my mum and my sister can look after the 1 year old, and have been alone with the 1 year old for many times, and have done a good job looking after the 1 year old, and surely that would be proof that they can look after the 2 year old, and they shouldn't have a restriction on the 2.5 year old and not have a restriction on the 1.5 year old, and the fact that they haven't bothered to take it off, it just shows how stupid and how ridiculous the system is. And they've got another 4 weeks to go before this next court hearing. This court hearing that should have happened a few months ago, but because of the DBS check, they couldn't sign him off, and they couldn't get the part, because they want to go on holiday. They really want to go on holiday, and they can't go on holiday until they get this passport back. And they can't get the passport back until he's been officially signed off. But yeah, until he's signed off, there's just a really awkward period where they're allowed to be alone with one and not the other. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And yeah, I was saying how it'd be, I'm really, really angry over why I wasn't allowed to have a child, even though I was trying for a child for a very long time, even though I was confident, even though I had a house and I'm really, really angry over the whole thing. And just the idea that maybe this woman switched from one council to the other just to try and do unexpected checks on Sophie as a way of, you know, we really want to get this child off you, and we're going to do anything we can, even though this court hearing should have been done 8 weeks ago, and this child should have been signed off by now, even though the mum and the sister are allowed to be alone with the younger child, and have been alone with the younger child for over a year now. Even though all this is in place, we're going to still keep this restriction where you're not allowed to be alone with this older child, which doesn't make any sense, because there's no reason for it. Because if the reason for them not being allowed to be alone with the older one is because they can't do it, well, obviously they can, because they've been doing it with the younger one. So why this restriction is still on, why they're still sort of in fear that they're going to have an unexpected check, and then for them to have an unexpected check straight a few days after this woman changes over, it's almost like she's deliberately trying to sabotage this. And the idea that there are people in social services that literally get their kicks from taking kids off Marco, who's a good parent. Okay, I'm not so sure about the other two, but they can do it. You know, they've proved for a long time that they can do it. So they can look after a child and be alone with the child. So to prove that you can look after and be alone with a child for over a year, and then to still have a restriction on an older child, why is social services so messed up that they can't just say, okay, well, we don't need to do any tests on the older child? Why? Because you've done it on the younger child. It's just, how can someone look after a 1 year old child for over a year and have 3, 4, 5 hours alone with that child, and for everything to be fine, and then for social services to still see a need to pressurize them and say that you're not allowed to be with the older child? I mean, why? There was no abuse done on the older child. There was no special treatment done. So why would they treat these two children differently? It's for me, it feels like their way of trying to control. We want to try and control. Our council this child belonged to the Surrey, not the Surrey Council. I think it was the Brighton Council or whatever the lower one is, and the Surrey one I think is the higher one. So there was two councils, and one was being really, really obsessive about we want everything to do this thing, and the other one was seeing things from the sort of more Sophie being slightly more saner. Hence, they didn't see a need to put on the restriction, but they had to put on a restriction. Why? Because the other child was taken away before Sophie even met Marco. But yeah, it's just a horrible, messed up situation, and it was nice seeing him dressed up in the fancy dress costumes. He loved the dinosaur outfit that I got him, and he's a big fan on dinosaurs and the Superman one as well. Don't think I like the pumpkin very much, but yeah. Hearing a sound. Don't know what that is. Hearing some sort of noise. I think it might be from next door. But yeah. And then what other things I want to say? My sister's working in a care home, and she's seeing problems with that because she hates the job because you have to do the job, but every time you change a nap or change an old person's clothes, I don't know if they have old people nappy, but every time you change a nappy or change an outfit or change a skirt or change shoes, or anytime you do anything, you have to spend 3 minutes writing up a report. And she said for everything you do, you have to make a report, and it's really distracting how you have to do something, make a report, do something, make a report, and you have to keep making a report to kind of prove that you're looking after the older people. But she said that it would make so much, or I said as well, it would make so much sense if there's one person who does all the writing up. So this person's had, this person changed that clothes on there, this person added shoes on this, and this person, if a system was done like that, it makes more sense. Because if the whole point of you doing these reports is to prove that you're looking after the older people who are losing their memory and can't remember things, if you've got this sort of daily report on, or hourly report on someone, it doesn't make sense that the person who's doing the work is doing the report too, because they could easily just not do the work and just do the report, and therefore say, oh, we changed her bed this time, and maybe they didn't. I think if you're doing the act and the report at the same time, it might give people a more incentive to just say, I'm just going to make the report, but I'm not actually going to do the work. But I think if it was run differently, and you had one person that's just sat on the computer the whole time, where people say, okay, I changed this person's nappy, I changed this person's bedding, I changed this person peed in their bed and I had to change the covers, or I had to add this, I dressed this person at this time, and I got them into bed at their nightie at this time. It would make so much more sense, because she hates this whole doing this, making a report, doing this, making a report. And if each report takes 3 minutes to write up and each action takes about 5 minutes to action, you actually spend half the time just doing the report. And you have to keep focusing your mind from doing the work to doing the report, and she doesn't like how that is. And I think it makes sense to have just someone at a computer 24/7 doing the report, because that person isn't doing the work, and therefore that person would kind of act as like a type of witness. So if someone else is changing the beds at this time, they need to come and say, I've just changed the beds, and then okay, I suppose there's a chance that they didn't change the beds. But if there's cameras around, so that they're doing the work. But if one person's doing the work and the other person is just sitting at taking up the reports, so say they have like 10 people under them, and all these 10 people are just constantly saying, yeah, I've just done this, yes, I've done this, and then you get someone sitting down making the reports, that does actually make more sense. And I think Sophie would prefer that, because she says she hates having to do things and then making a report, do things, making a report, and if you're doing that way, how do you know that you did any of these things? If the report is only about just making a report and proving it, then it'd be easy to just make the report and not actually do the stuff. Whereas if they had one person doing the item, if they've gone away and come back 5 minutes later and said they've changed the bed, well, you can say, well, you haven't changed the bed because you weren't able to do that in the 5 minutes. But if they come back 10 minutes later, I don't know. But I think if there's two people working together, one doing the report and then like 8 people just doing the work, then I feel like that would be a better system. So something else I wanted to just add in this care home thing. But yeah, they're switching her to kitchen duty, because my sister doesn't like she's autistic, so doesn't like really talking to people. And as a sort of carer person, you have to constantly talk to people, and these people don't really remember who you are because of their dementia, and I think some of the staff she doesn't really get along with or doesn't like them particularly. And with the kitchen, it's just, you know, wash dishes, and help the cook, help the chef and stuff. So it's more working with one person and then just doing your own work the rest of the time. So she's happier in the kitchen. The problem is, I think a lot of the staff prefer working in the kitchen, and there's not as much kitchen job. There's not as many staff members needed in the. There's a lot of residents. I think there's about 60 residents or something. There's about 60 residents. So there's a lot of work to do with doing all the changing of the beds and stuff. But there's not that much work in the kitchen because they only eat twice a day or something. I think they might eat 3 times a day, but it might be a small meal, one of them. But yeah. She's I think she's going to stay at the job. She's staying at the job, but she's going to try and get more kitchen work because she prefers that. What else do I want to say? I don't know. It's quite a long video.